So the next presentation will be by Giulio Squillacciotti from Università di Venezia. Yeah. And his topic is juxtaposition of fragmented memories from the 80s and 90s, Roman hardcore, self-celebration and self-consciousness. And the critical opponent is Isidro Lopez-Aparicio, professor from Facultad de Bellas Artes, Universidad de Granada. So okay. Please, Giulio.
Hi, everybody. This project is a 5-year project that I started in 2005, aside from the university context. I am from Rome, and sorry. And I am from Rome, and I then moved to Venice for the MA at the Architecture University. So this research started with the idea of investigating the hardcore phenomena, which is a musical and sort of lifestyle phenomena imported from the US at the early 80s in Europe. And the focus of this research was just on the local context of Rome, which is, of course, is a big city, but it's not a northern Italy city where loads of big and mainstream bands were passing by with their tours. And so, of course, this context is sort of far from international other context led this development toward a very local development, and relating it to, of course, the few chances of getting and importing a phenomenon in its totality. And I decided to focus this sort of research in 15 years, from 84, which is sort of a marginal date in which the first band from Rome refers himself as an hardcore band. So specifically inspiring from American music and far from the English punk nihilism that was already very present and was a big part of the already existing subculture in Rome, related, of course, strictly related to politics. So what I really wanted to do was sort of watching at its development during these 15 years before the internet era and all the facilities that came along with it of importing the totality of a phenomenon, which means aesthetically speaking and musically speaking in terms of chances. So what I was interested in was going to the protagonists, the main characters of this movement, juvenile movement, and trying to getting to know how they got in touch with this thing and how they developed their own research. So I sort of made a parallel in between their research and mine, because my research was a physical research, not like a digital. Not please send me a picture, please let's meet. It was a physical in terms of going and meet these people, going there and taking real things they produced during these 15 years. And of course, I was interested in how it was seen by the already existing subcultures, which were strictly related to politics post after the 70s in Italy. So both left and right-wing armed extra party groups, and all these things from which these young people took distance. And then, of course, in the end, I wanted to know how, from that experience, was sort of remaining in their own lives, how they see the changes after the year 2000, with the chances that everyone got by getting, as I said, the totality of a foreign movement phenomenon. So I had to switch a bit, to change a bit, this presentation after yesterday's talks about the methodology and like the building of a methodology while we are actually looking for it. And that's what more or less I did. I'm coming from very classical studies. I studied medieval art history and archaeology. So I had this sort of layer kind of studies, which is, I could say, an imprinting in my way of researching. And so I had, as I said, to build and to find a methodology to follow. And first of all, of course, I had to get in touch with all the main characters of this movement, and by interviewing them with video, just video interviews, and then to collect at the same time what I call finds, like materials, which were, of course, videos from the shows, pictures, flyers, and all like DIY, do-it-yourself made things. Fanzines, records, letters, patches, and all the silk screen things that they were doing since the half of the 80s. And then, of course, after this, I began this in 2005, and after this, of course, I had to import all this video material that I collected. And at the time, even if I'm not speaking about 20 years ago, but even 5 years ago, it was very expensive to buy an hard drive capable of containing like more than 250 gigabytes, and the amount of interviews that I got was more than 150 hours of interview. So working with a friend of mine who's an editor, we imported all this material in low quality, so offline, which means that after that you edited this, you have to re-import just the bits you've edited in, of course, high quality. And archiving all the materials and the finds that I got from these people, which means dispatches and pictures and everything. And what really interested me was to really having these things in my hands and not just having them sent by email or look for them in the internet, but was really a straight getting things and archiving them by scanning and with sort of the classical categorization of an archival archivist work. I worked as an archivist in more than one archaeological excavation. And so the idea was to build a narrative based on so after, of course, importing all this material, we should have watched, me and the editor, all this raw material, and we didn't know how to proceed, because then I sooner had to move to Venice. By working at distance, we thought about watching all these materials together and marking all the interesting topics, and which I had at the same time written down on sheets of paper, so that once in Venice I could have sort of started the editing on paper by juxtapose all the common topics that were coming out during these interviews. So yeah, that's it. The main idea was building a narrative based on those paper sheets, and then once back in Rome, switching this paper editing into the computer. When I started doing these interviews, of course I had to deal with the fact that these things were, of course, from a recent past, but these people had sort of a need of removal, sort of an oblivion of what they did, like even 15 years before, because they were, I'd say, they weren't thinking that they could have made a living out of this, but they, of course, they were upset that they couldn't make it into music. So there was both this thing of the distance in time, which sort of needed a deeper reflection for them to talk about all the specific things I needed to know, and dealing at the same time with this need of I don't want to tell you these things, and of course the fact of facing a camera. But it's interesting how that's why in the title I said the self-consciousness and self-epic or self-celebration, because if there is a first mistrust in the questions I was asking them, going ahead, the fact that the third person, so sort of myself, like the a third person asking about what they did even 15 years before, which they were considering not that worth it, sort of got them growing in themselves the fact of if there's someone interested in that thing, it means it has a value. And so there's this self-recognition of a value of something that they just did when they were kids. And of course the next step was sort of a self-celebration by talking very bad about the nowadays situation, because this movement is of course still on, and about the fact that contemporary society and mainstream television or fashion took little bits and pieces from this lifestyle, which were, I don't know, tattoos or a certain kind of music related to noise, which at the time was considered noise, and then it's a more common noise in the ears of people. And so I started sort of building this structure of the editing by the things I knew, and a bit even like arrogantly trying to put the history as I wanted. And of course, this schedule of editing was. I thought about it in a way, in a cinematographic way, like to be. Because the idea was actually making a documentary, a very classical cinematographic documentary, which should have had sort of a narrative, which had, like, of course, highs and downs, and that would have been easy to see, to understand, even for people which were outside. So the main idea for me was not just talking about music or kinds of music or just fashion itself, was about really understanding the way they got information, the way they got informed about these things that were far away, the way they lived them, the way they exchanged them, and the way they were redoing them by playing themselves, and the way they were living them daily, because it was like a full-time option even in school and whatever. So I had to face, of course, with a lot of footage of the early shows of this kind in Rome. And the interesting thing is that, as I said, there was a very strong political, already existing subculture related to squat and to social centers or whatever. But the fact that this thing was in a kind of positive way, very constructive way, loads of them were not using drugs. They sort of adopted the straight edge lifestyle, which was another thing imported from the America, which stated that for being a punk, you didn't need necessarily to get wasted, to get drunk or whatever, because that was what society wanted you to do for being a counterculture. And these people, of course, took it in a Roman context, which is not America. But in a way it worked, because after the 70s and all the very revolutionary actions that these squats and social centers did, they ended up like with drugs and nothing more. And these people were, the interesting thing is that these people weren't that much understood by, of course, by these people who thought they were sort of Nazis because they didn't use drugs. And or just, I don't know, bourgeoisie people or whatever. They weren't, of course, not understood by the right-wing people, because anyways, at that time, dressing up like, I don't know, we just saw, like, this kind of punk way was, of course, a left-wing thing. So it was a bit of another, and they weren't understood by punk people, of course, because they weren't committed that much into politics. There's one guy in the interview that said, we were never enough anti-fascist, we were never enough angry, or we were never angry enough to be against enough. And another thing I discovered is that, another thing, I mean, the first thing most of these people got in touch with the music was skateboarding. The first videos they got from abroad, from the US and Italy, were these skateboarding videos, which soundtracks were, of course, punk music or hardcore music, and they got in touch with these two things. And it was very interesting, because the fact that they were just few people, like alternative people in that sense, not the previous sense, They were all unifying themselves by skateboarding together, even if they were listening to all different kind of music. Of course, for some of them, the main musical feature to be like different was at the beginning metal, but they were looking for a wider sense in terms of political commitment, not in terms of that time in Italy, in Rome specifically, political commitment, which I just explained. And then, of course, a lot of stories came out, very nice ones, about these finds. Like, for example, I found this Super 8 film from the 80s, and literally in a box in a basement of one of these guys that wasn't revealed, and it was a K4T from Kodak, which it's not produced, it's not revealed anymore. So I just found the only place in the States who was able to reveal it, and they wrote me back saying it just scratches, you don't see anything. But the guy was too much into revealing it because he hadn't seen it for, I don't know, 20 years. No, yeah, 80, yeah, 20 years. And so we revealed it, and actually was just this thing, but was, I don't know, very exciting. And other of these finds, I didn't put everything in it, but just to let you know, the way of the graphic was switching, and it was, of course, computers already existed, but these people didn't have money to buy them, so they were all silkscreen made, and sometimes handy-made, and sometimes printed with computers and then stitched on A4 sheets, and this kind of stuff. And I collected all of them, and it's fascinating how these people, even if they were sort of part of them, like rejecting this past, they all kept these things into archives. They all really archived these things. And of course, tons and thousands of pictures. Then a very interesting thing that during that time I discovered was were two sort of commercial sheets inside two different vinyls, one from UK and one from Rome. The first vinyl, proper hardcore music vinyl put out in Rome, and the same, that they were both from 92. And of course one is in English and the other one is in Italian, but they're saying exactly the same thing, even if, of course, they haven't been seeing each other's sheet. And it is the way the way they speak about their idea of politics, it's exactly the same. Like, it should feel political just being part of it, just being there. Why these people don't understand that we're doing a political act by being committed to a cause of do it yourself, or a cause of letting people play their own music in places. Otherwise, these people couldn't have the chance to play. Or a lot of self-criticism about taking the real world ways and moods of ways of behaving, like being jealous or wanting to be fashion or wanting to be recognized as something, and the self-criticism of saying, what's the point in saying that we are a counterculture if we actually are just reproducing the real life bad ways of behaving inside our little ghettos. And these are the same things that are written in Italian. And of course they were against drugs, and it was nice, and most of them were really anarchic people, and the postscript at the end of that one says, this record is not dedicated, it's not for those kind of people who thinks of being able to fight state and the mafias by buying their drugs, which means alcohol or drugs that were imported at the time from Albania and whatever. So it was like the counter way of being against. Then that's where at the presentation, I kind of changed in these days, because I thought it was more interesting the way to talk and to share, the way I sort of looked for a methodology to follow. Once I found myself at the editing studio with this guy, with this editor, I, of course, discovered that the story that I wrote down on paper was not fitting with the images and the words they were saying, because at the very base of this idea of building a narrative was to avoid a voiceover, was just the idea of juxtapose their voices because the topics were all common topics. So speaking about supervisors and things that at the time gave me, I don't know, they kind of let me understood that the failure was like kind of positive to go back and rethink about the methodology to follow to deal with this material. I found very interesting interviews from Vittorio De Seta, who's an Italian documentarist. I don't know if, anyways, from the 20s, who in the early 50s, 3 years before television was, arrived in Italy, he filmed some agricultural and shepherding praxis and rituals in Sicily, in the islands of Italy, and he filmed them without, of course, a voiceover, but he filmed them just letting them doing what they wanted, which was a sort of...
Is a picture as an image as it should?
No, it's a video, but it's the interview that I got the idea from. So I don't know, he gave me, he was talking about his way of going there and not trying to put his own ideas in that field, but just being as a satellite of getting what the things they were doing, that he thought it was fair enough.
So fare l'esempio dell'astronomia, cioè passare dal sistema tolemaico a quello copernicano. Il sistema tolemaico la Terra è sì, il sistema copernicano è un satellite che ruota intorno al Sole. Cioè questo secondo me
you've got about 2 minutes now, if you can make it.
Anyways, he's saying about the switching of a way of relating toward the context that is already existing. And this was interesting as well. So what you expected to do doesn't necessarily fit with what you did. It doesn't necessarily fit with what you wanted to do. So I kind of felt that this thing of having an idea of narrative that was kind of already structured was a failure. So and then I saw a very interesting interview to Lévi-Strauss, and he talks about the big deal of anthropology related to contemporary society and the differences in between being an historian and being an anthropologist. And he said, never mind. His way of researching was like, quoting Max Ernst, was like juxtaposing a collage of memories. There was not just one memory, but the matter was about accumulating and gathering all these things and just giving it a narrative. So I got, these are some theoretical issues, and so I got to a second methodology that was the story on paper doesn't fit with the material, so I just have to adjust this material, which is, of course, it's super hard work because working on more than 150 interviews, not using a voiceover. So I watched again all the material. I tried to build this narrative with this basic idea of not choosing a voiceover and not choosing a hardcore music. The only hardcore music you hear is the one you see from those videos we saw. There was no music because it's crazy stuff. But so the idea was building these oral traditions of single of individuals translated into this collective memory, which didn't exist about this movement, which is still super alive, but of course younger people, and some like theoretical issues that are related to some of these books that at the same time I was reading, and so I switched. I have to run.
Yeah, I'm awfully sorry.
Then I had the chance to show this project in halfway into an installation in a foundation in Turin, and the big deal for me was like not to be. I was afraid, or that the big concern was not to be seen as a just take it, that I just took some things from someone and put somewhere else. I really wanted that this filter that I applied with the interviews was kind of perceivable. That was the main goal. So I brought some of the stuff without an idea of collectionism, but with that idea of just explaining some of the little things they produced. And of course the video interviews already juxtaposed. This is another installation with all the, and I had 3 bits of the documentary translated with this idea of juxtaposition, but I think it's too late. So.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Sorry for cutting you short. So, if I give the word to Isidro Lopez-Aparicio.
Hi, sorry, it's so late. I can see the faces, and I will try to be as quick as possible, and I will speak in Spanish. Take your time. Everybody ready? This one? Everybody ready, isn't it? Okay. I think, Giulio, you have done a really good work. I have to... Perdona, lo decía en español. Perdona. He dicho que... Lo primero que tenía que decir es que Giulio que ha hecho un gran trabajo. Me parece que indiscutiblemente tiene una estructura absolutamente lógica. Tiene un objetivo claro, ha partido de ciertas preguntas que ha intentado contestarlas. Ha planteado una temática acotada, tanto en tiempo como en espacio. Ha escogido un tema de gran valor, con un gran potencial, el hardcore, un tema que no solamente tiene ese momento en Italia, sino que tiene una gran continuidad, lo cual hace que también el estudio que haya realizado tenga una vigencia en la actualidad y que pueda ser extrapolado este estudio a otro tipo de posibilidades. Indiscutiblemente tiene un sistema claro, una metodología de trabajo, una documentación, una presentación, una apariencia profesional, artística, pero al mismo tiempo también podríamos ver ese fundamento tan denso de documentación, tan profesional, antropológico. Después, finalmente, como bien has mostrado, tiene una apariencia artística. Pero en cierto momento parece como que el estudio, en este caso sería un estudio antropológico de casos de ejemplo. Para mí me parece, y destaco una de las frases que has puesto ahora mismo, que me parece quizás de lo más interesante, que es la individualidad del sentimiento fragmentado, unido y construido en la celebración de una conciencia común. Me parece que quizás es casi la hipótesis y el motivo principal de su estudio. Y el hardcore, en el fondo, es donde se desarrolla esa principal hipótesis. Lo que sí es cierto es que si planteáramos eso como la hipótesis real del trabajo, a nivel de conclusión, pero también me consta que este es un trabajo que tiene todavía etapas por desarrollar y es donde quizá encontrará esa final conclusión a esa respuesta que él plantea. Tenía bastantes preguntas. Nosotros habíamos hablado incluso de la posibilidad de escenografiar algo entre los dos, un poco, pero por tiempo y demás lo vamos a hacer así y no te voy a entretener demasiado con preguntas, si no nos podemos. Pero obviamente para mí sí me interesaría mucho el saber el por qué y el para qué, que a mí es una cuestión que me ha interesado en casi todas las presentaciones. El por qué han escogido ese tema, si ese tema tiene realmente la potencialidad como para convertirse en un estudio de tesis. Hay situaciones en las que he visto que dudaría que lo mismo llegara, el para qué se ha escogido, Ese tipo de preguntas sí que me parecen muy interesantes
Sí,
tenerlas en cuenta.
Sí, sí. Vale, me he olvidado de... I'm going to speak in English.
Yes, I'll go.
I forgot about mentioning this, but an artist I worked for, which is Montadas, a Spanish artist, always try to apply sort of a keyword schedule to all these projects, and we spent a lot of time together, and of course one of these first keywords is for whom, and he kept on saying it's not enough if it's for you, this thing. Of course, the real beginning, the real need of doing this was a very personal need, was A-side, extra university or whatever. It was a real need of trying to put together all the experiences these things did, aesthetically, politically, that were not understood at the time, and try to put them, like, to unify them together, to let people that were newly to this thing, with the nowadays possibilities of organizing a tour or show, or even getting all the informations and music like in 1 second, was in a positive way to build a unifying document, not